Good morning, everyone. Thank you for participating in this training session. The aim of this session is to provide you with the tools and the skills on how to manage the results, the research outputs, and how to do an output management plan. Our foundation seeks to disseminate the results of projects and make them available as soon as possible to other researchers and the wider society. Open science is a movement which aims to make scientific research, results, and data accessible to everyone. In terms of scientific publications, it means seeking to open access as soon as possible. For other kind of results or outputs, such as data, it means they must be preserved in a way that makes them findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, what we know as FAIR principles. Within this aim in mind, all beneficiaries must submit an output management plan within the first 6 months of the project. Among other aspects, the plan should refer to the outputs that will be generated, how and they will be shared, where they will be available, how they will be preserved, and in case of sensitive data, the nature of any processing that will be undertaken to meet applicable current legislation. This is very important for us, and this is what we will be talking about today. This session will be led by Dr. Ignasi Labastida, Director of the CaixaResearch and Innovation Unit at the University of Barcelona, and the leader of Creative Commons project in Spain since 2003. And most important, our expert in this matter. He's not only the person in charge of this training, but he will also be reviewing your output management plan. And you can contact him for any help you may need during the submission process. We really wish this session is useful for researchers and project managers to keep learning in this important subject. Ignasi, go ahead, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Carla, for this kind introduction. And it's a pleasure to be again with new researchers that got these grants from La Caixa, from the Health Research Call. And as you said, we're going to talk about the output management plan. We will mainly focus on data because I think probably is the challenging output, especially for managing. And as we'll try to have a session as useful as possible, and not just for the output management plan, to fill an output management plan, but to also learn and to get these skills that are needed for this call and for other calls, because as you'll see, this is something that is not just a requirement from La Caixa, it's something that is getting general for many funders. Just a bit of housekeeping. If you have any question, you can just post it in the chat, or I will try to stop and ask if anyone has a question. I will call the person who has the question, and if you can then open your cameras and identify yourself, then I will try to answer any question. And of course, at the end, we will have also some time to, if you have the questions at the end or you want to pose the questions at the end. The presentation also will be provided to you later, so you will have any more time to look at the presentation. And as Carla just said, if you want, you can contact me and discuss about any detail on filling the output management plan or any detail regarding the management of the outputs. So let's start. I'm gonna share the screen, the presentation. And as I said, we're going to talk about a lot of things. We're going to talk about the context of why we are here, what we mean as research data, the requirements from funders, institutions. Also, another topic or buzzword that we are hearing a lot, the FAIR data. What is FAIR data? We're going to also talk about planning the management of your data, any ethical consideration. I think has already been said by Carla about the ethical points, working with the data, sharing with the data, and especially look at the different cases that I have prepared for you more in a practical way, because at the beginning we will see more like a theoretical way, but at the end, what is important is that you implement this theory in a practical way. So when we talk about open science, we talk about any process and not just the outputs. We think that open science is a general approach of doing research in a different way, in a way that is more close to the society, but also collaborative, transparent. And here there is a taxonomy that, as you can see, is like having a taxonomy of research, and you put at any point, you place the open word. So we have the publications, about the access to publications that Carla also mentioned, the data, but also reproducible research, evaluation, policies, etc. We can look at different definitions of open science. Here there is one that it was stated by the Commission a few years ago, that is defining open science as an activity, a movement that has a goal, and the goal is to transform science through these ICT tools, the networks, the media, with the idea of making research more open, global, collaborative, and closer to the society and creativity. But we don't need to forget that also it's important that we have these other words of efficiency, quality, integrity, reproducibility, equity, transparency, and public engagement. There are important words that we cannot forget when we talk about open science. So it's not just opening outputs, it's also that we are looking for these values of research that somehow we can summarize in the integrity of research. In fact, this is one of the pillars of the open science, the strength and integrity in research. There has been many definitions, but also there has been many calls for open science, for acting for open science. One of them was almost 7 years ago when the Netherlands were holding the presidency of the European Council, when they made this Amsterdam call for action on open science in one of the meetings in Amsterdam in April 2016. And as you see here, data were fundamental and are fundamental in open science. Here also, I would like to show you the difference, because from this call for action on open science, there were two goals. We want full open access for all scientific publications, but the second one is not full open access for data. The goal for data is that we need a new approach towards this optimal reuse of research data. What we are looking for is not to opening all data, because as I will repeat it many times during the presentation, this is not possible, because not all data can be and must not be open. And this is something that also we have to learn, and we have to know how to do it. But what we are looking for is to have data in a better way, that data could be easily reusable. I know that this is not easy, but our aim is to have data in a way that it increases the reusability of the data. And of course, to do that, we need sharing data. We need stewards to help us managing data. And of course, we need the standards, we need infrastructures. And I think what we are doing today and all the policy from the foundation help us to increase this optimal reuse of research data. Because at the end, what we want is this final goal. We want that our data to be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And this is the acronym of FAIR. FAIR data is to have the data following these 4 principles. And I have to state here from the beginning that fair not mean open. Not all fair data should be open. The reusability, we'll see later, the reusability doesn't mean opening everything. It means that at least I should inform the users, the people who access to my data, about how this data can be reused. And at the end, if we have all our data fair, following these principles that we'll have a look later, we can establish this European Open Science Cloud. This is a project at the European level, but could be extended more internationally. We can have different regional clouds. This is not a new infrastructure. This is more like a network, like a connection. The idea of the European Open Science Cloud, that is an initiative that is already ongoing, and there have been already some projects performed and carried out, and also there are some pilots going on. So the idea of the European Open Science Cloud is to connect all these locations where data is available, research data is available, for the researchers and for the citizens in general to find the data and to somehow reuse the data, connect the data, build open that data, etc. So it's not building new infrastructures, it's more connecting what fair data and in a standard way. So when we talk about research data, we need to think what we are talking about. And again, we can define research data in very different ways. But before, we need to think that when we talk about data, we need to look at the whole research of the data, because we create data, we process the data, we analyze the data, we try to preserve data, maybe not all the data. Also, we need to learn how to delete some data, because we cannot just preserve all the data. We might say, okay, this data is not useful and we are not going to preserve. Afterwards, we can give access to the data. We can give access to the data in a restricted way. We can give the access to the data in a more publicly way. And that's one of the goals of open science, but as I said, in a normal way, not in just a wild way. And at the end, if we provide this access to our data, some people can reuse the data, and from reusing the data, they can again start the cycle by creating data, processing data, etc. So that's what is important, that when we talk about the outputs and when we talk to opening outputs, and in this case to opening data, is that we need to think about how we're going to open the data from the beginning, before creating the data, having all this picture in mind, because if not, if we just think about sharing the data at the end, once we have already fulfilled all this cycle, we might have problems because we haven't thought about before on how to perform all these steps. We can also see the same in the research cycle, in the full research cycle, where here we have the initiation of the research, conducting research, preserving, sharing, and build on the research. And on the outside part of the cycle, we see all the implications of the data. So probably when we apply for the grant at the beginning, we might be asked to say something about the data, which will be the data you will work with, or how you're gonna preserve the data, or how you're gonna share the data. And for that, and that's what we will dedicate some time today, is we need to organize and to plan how we're gonna manage our data, our outputs. And as I said, it's important to perform this planification at the beginning, because it will help us to perform all the research. If we think about how we're going to share our outputs at the end, where we are publishing data on the left of this image, then maybe we'll have some problems because we didn't take the right decisions at the beginning. So that's the way a data management plan and output management plan is important, to organize that, to write this data management plan, to discuss with your colleagues how you want to manage all these outputs at the beginning. And of course, during all the cycle, we need to think about how we're going to generate the data, where we're going to store or process the data, how we're going to analyze it, and of course, at the end, how we're going to share the data, with whom, when, where, and at the end, we can also get some acknowledgement, some recognition, and also some citation for any kind of output. I don't know if you are aware that last December, there was this constitution of the coalition for the reformulation, a reform on the research assessment. And in this coalition, that is, there are many research institutions, but also research agencies, funders, the evaluation agencies. One of the goals of this reform of research assessment is to get value not for the publications as outputs, but to get value for any kind of output, to have a diversity of output. So that's why it's important also that when we publish data, as it is stated here, we get some recognition and we got some standards on the way we publish all these outputs. So also what is challenging sometimes when we talk in a general way about managing research outputs or data is what is the meaning of an output, or in this case, what is the meaning of data? Well, data is like the primary source to support any technical or scientific inquiry, research, scholarship, or artistic activity. And it's like the evidence in the research process. The point is that for some disciplines, data can be just a figure. For other disciplines, it's an image. For other disciplines, it's a text. So the definition of data is broad enough to have everyone thinking that they work with data. In your case, probably you are aware of the kind of data you are using, but in other cases, I remember, for instance, with the law school, we were discussing the other day what is data for them. And of course, it's very different of the data that you might work in your projects. And of course, data can be coming from experiments, from observations, from operations, from simulation. And also we can define also the source of the data, could be from the public sector, could be from the research. There are many classifications of data. So this idea of this primary source is the idea that you need to take with you. And probably in your research, in your project, you will have a very diversity of data. You will have images, you will have tables or spreadsheets, you would have some figures. It will depend on you, on the experiment, on the process that you will perform, on how you define your data. So what are you required to do? Well, we will discuss in a moment the requirements of the foundation, but also there are other requirements that you might be also required if you have other projects. Probably the most known is the European funder, the Commission, that since 2014, they have established a policy on improving or enabling the sharing of data. It's not something that is required that all data must be open. And there is still this myth that, oh, the funder is asking me that I need to share everything. No, the only condition is that you need to develop, to write, and to share a data management plan, similar, we'll see it in a minute, than the one from La Caixa. And also that you explain how you're going to reach these principles of fairness, how you're going to get your data findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. But you are free to use any repository to share your data. You need to follow this idea of data should be as open as possible, as close as necessary. And you can say, you can state in your data management plan with this funder, but with any other funder, that your data must be closed for many reasons. So that's why it's important to develop a plan and stating there, what are you going to do with your data? In a similar way, La Caixa has this policy. The policy on the output management plan, it was focused for some projects at the beginning, but afterwards it was expanded to different goals. And it's like it's a part of the open science policy of La Caixa. And it's the same. What you are asked to do is to have a plan, to develop this output management plan, and to try to open the data as much as possible, but close. And it's important what I say, that you need to close some data because it's required for many good reasons. So the main funder requirements are a data management plan, an output management plan, a planification to get the data as fair as possible, and to publish the data related to the published outputs. When you publish some results, it's not enough to publish a paper. You probably, in many cases, it's advisable to publish together, along with the paper, the data that underpins the results that are published. And with this idea, data as open as possible, as close as necessary. But not only the funders, or sometimes in some institutions, you will be asked to share the data. Nowadays, there are journals, and every time more and more journals that ask you for this statement on data availability. There are different data availability policies. Probably the most common in the past was to say, if you want the data, please contact us. But more and more there are journals. Here I state, for instance, all the PLOS journal, the Public Library of Science, because there was one of the publishers who began with all the policy on sharing data. But also another here, Ecology and Evolution, has a similar policy that in this case, for instance, the Journal of Ecology and Evolution requires as a condition for publication that the data supporting the results in the paper should be archived in an appropriate public archive. As you see here, there are some examples of what is an appropriate public archive. And again, if there is an archive where you usually go and look for data from your colleagues, this is the right place where you could place your data. But also, if you have an institutional repository from your institution or for a network of institutions, then this is, if they follow the FAIR principles, this is a right place. As it says down in the last sentence, stable, it could be seen as a stable public repository. And also you'll have, like the last policy showed here, you'll have also policies that are less restricted. They say, well, you are encouraged to share your data, but you are not required. And this is not a requirement that if you don't share the data, you will not be assessed or reviewed for publication. It's more like an option. So that's another requirement that you may face when you are trying to publish your results in a journal. Okay, but we talk about FAIR, a lot about FAIR, findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable, but what does it mean? As I said before, and I showed before, we have this idea of findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable, but what does it really mean? So the idea of findable is like, you need to place your data in repositories, as I said, it could be a public repository, from an institution, from a community, from projects. It will depend. It's your choice. But then you have to put information about the data, what we identify as metadata. We need also to use identifiers, to use meaningful names, to facilitate version control if we change the data for any reason, because maybe we increase or we have a new series in this data set. So that's the idea of findability. The accessibility is, well, this new data is going to be open by default. There will be where it will be deposited, which is the software we are required to use for this specific data, because sometimes even we try to get as much as possible standards. So try to use standard formats. Sometimes if we are in a specific activity that requires a specific facility or tool or program, then the format will be the one that is provided by this machine. So probably sometimes when you share data, you need to share also some kind of software. And this is the idea of the output management plan. If you are planning not just to share data, but to share software to, again, the same, you can follow the same principles for software, and to state that your software is going to be shared in some specific repository. The interoperability probably is the most challenging principle here, because the desire is to have data that it could be understood not only by people, also by machines. This is probably the most difficult, because for doing that, we need to establish taxonomies, ontologies, standards, and nowadays maybe we are a bit far from that. But if we somehow use the same terminology, we use same standards, variables, or scales that the community use, maybe then we can reach a level of interoperability high enough for somehow be understood by at least some machines. And the reusability is more focused, as I said before, on explaining how data can be reusable. It's clear that one of the options for reusability is to open the data. So it means facilitating access to the data, but not just public access, but this idea of the open access to allow other people to reuse the data by default. When we say that we have our data open, we mean that our data is available for everyone, not just to access, but to reuse it by means of a license that can be a license granting all the rights, and also a license that restricts some rights. If you restrict some rights, then you need to clearly state who is the one, or who are the ones that can lift those restrictions that could grant more permissions beyond what the data, the license is allowing. And of course, in the reusability also, you can state that the data must be closed for any good reason: privacy, confidentiality, security, commercial use also. And then you can also state that, well, who knows, maybe with a signature of an agreement and a specific agreement for reuse that data, then people can access with some conditions, with some restrictions, maybe partially to the data set. So that's the idea of reusability, to explain how data can be reused. Also, the FAIR principles can be somehow implemented in the data repositories. And when I say data here, we can think about any kind of repositories for publications, for data, for software. And again, the same idea of finding the repository so that the repository follows and a specific standardization of metadata, of communication, etc. The accessibility, the interoperability, and the reusability, they are the same values that we can apply in our infrastructure. If we have our repository following the FAIR principles, then, as I said at the beginning of my presentation, we could connect these repositories one to another and to build this interconnection, this network that at the European level, we call it this European Open Science Cloud. Also, the FAIR principles can be somehow applied in a different way. There are like different degrees of FAIR data. On the top, you'll see what is not really FAIR data because the data is not available. Sometimes we have some findability from humans when we get just an identifier, could be a DOI, could be a handle. I have the data here, an URL, for instance, but I don't have information about the data. So if we bring some metadata about the data I'm having somewhere, then we could state that we have FAIR metadata. But what is important is the three different solutions in the bottom line, where we have data that is restricted, but is FAIR because we have all the information about the metadata, we have all the information about the identifier, etc. When we state that FAIR data is open access, it means that the data is, all the data set is available. So the difference between these first two is if the data is restricted or the access is completely open. And finally, if we have the data in a place where we have all the functionality links, so meaning that I can make queries and can ask questions and get the information from the data, is what we call like the completely FAIR data, that we can get all this information, everything is FAIR. So all these three situations in the bottom could be stated as we are fulfilling the principles of fair data. Just an example to show you how complex could be, especially the interoperability of the data. And I'm going to place this example that is not really a case from verification to make data fair, but also it's more a case that was posed by Tim Berners-Lee a few years ago when we were discussing about the openness of data, because we were saying, okay, it's enough to say my data is open because it's available and also people can reuse it. So the discussion here was about the formats. Of course, if I share data in a PDF format and I release it saying anyone can reuse it, we can say that it's open. But in this case, Tim Berners-Lee was saying, well, this is not the most suitable format to share data, and especially because it's not easy or not automatic to reuse that data. So that's why he stated that this data has only 1 star. And if we going up to the 5 stars, where we have the linked open data with all the semantics there, you see that you have different formats that are more suitable for data, for sharing data and for improving the reusability of the data. Of course, we have an example here that if we read this in a PDF file, and now if it was like a PDF file, what you have now on the screen, you might say, well, it's good. I understand that which kind of data, I understand where it comes from, I understand when these values were acquired, what this 247 figure means, because there is also the magnitude of these values, etc. But this is for a machine is useless, because the machines don't understand that. They don't have this capacity of understanding what is the meaning and all that. So if we want to reach the 5-star data, we will need to share this table in this format. And of course, this is very challenging and this is time consuming. So we need to find like a kind of balance between these two approaches, because what we cannot, as researchers, is to spend more time on preparing data to be shared than to doing the actual research. So probably we'll need to find a middle point between PDFs, let's call it this way, and this linked open data. But of course, as close we are to the linked open data and as easily we use devices that perform all these metadata together, then it will be our level of interoperability and understanding by machines will be higher and higher. So before starting the planification, this section of planification, I'd like to just stop for a moment and see if there is any question, any comment that someone would like to pose. No?
Hi, I have a question actually.
Okay.
I was raising my hand, but maybe.
Okay, sorry, I didn't. So Paula Samso?
Yes, hello. I
Hello.
think you can see me now. I work at the Scientific Coordination Office of EDBAPS, and I was having a short discussion with the researcher today. She asked me about the definition of research outputs, because what we usually see is that funders are asking for data management plans. But this new concept, well, this was a new concept also for me actually, output management plan. And she was basically asking whether we should also include other outputs besides what is classically defined as data, software and databases, of course. But she was asking, for example, what to do with materials that were also outputs of her research. For example, in the field of cell biology, a cell line or an antibody. So
the advice is to yes. The answer is yes. You should include some comment on that. And again, as I said, you can just say that it's going to be restricted or going to be closed or whatever. So the idea of the plan is not to explain or to justify if you want to open that. It's more like something useful for you to state how you're going to manage these possible different ways of different kinds of outputs. So yes, we focus on data because it's probably what is new and that people is requiring, but also the Commission now with the new template for what they call the data management plan for Horizon Europe, they have included a section on other outputs. So until Horizon 2020, when they start all these policies on data management plans, there was no section, and there was also these questions about what is data? It's all software included in data, and some policy officers were saying, well, yeah, you can say something, but it wasn't not clear. So that's the reason why now they have this new section on other outputs. So my answer will be yes, include some comments about the outputs.
So at least, okay, thank you so much. Perfect, thanks.
You're welcome.
The question.
Carla also had answered that it's included also in the call of the projects. So you have it in the chat, what Carla just said. I don't know if you want to add something else, Carla.
Ignasi, I was just saying that in the platform where you have to do the output management plan, there's a section with the outputs that you will be requested to add every end of the year. If you check that section, and also there's a guide there, I think that will help you think different outputs that you might have on your project that will be requested later. So it's really good to include that on the output management plan. So that might help you also.
Okay, so then now we have the theory, let's call it this way. We know what is research data, we know what is fair. Let's start planning what I should put in these plans. So I may go back to the presentation, and sorry, and let's think about what is a data management plan. What I would like to that you get as a something to go back home, and like the clear idea is that these plans, let's call it output management plan, call it data management plan, but these plans has to be something useful for you and your researchers. You must think that this is not just a bureaucratic burden, another bureaucratic paper that I have to present. No, the idea is that this is a document that is what we think that it could help you on facilitating your research, on foreseeing possible problems, and analyzing future situations. Let me share with you some cases, like when sometimes at the end of a project, some people has not a clear understanding of who can use the data, who can use the outputs that they have achieved or made as a result of as a project. And the problem there is because at the beginning, they didn't plan about, well, these outputs that came from this specific task in this project, performing this laboratory, is for everyone, or only the secondary data once processed or once we mix it with other data. So these things, or for instance, we thought we're going to use, we're going to place the data completely open or not, we only want to restrict. So if you, at the beginning of performing your research, you clarify all these issues, it will be easier to avoid future situations that are sometimes problematic. So that's why it's important to have this output or data management plan. And you must think that this management plan should be something dynamic. It's not something that you do at the beginning and you need to follow strictly. It's something that can be changed because research changes, because at the beginning, you may plan to access to some data or to get some observations or make some experiments. And during the research process, there are changes. So maybe you will have new data or you will not have the data that you expected to have, etc. So the idea of this plan is to make any change that you need, and at the end to have like a final management plan where it could be useful for you for future researchers.
What a data management plan or an output management plan requires to include. As we were saying before, any data, any output that will be produced, gathered, observed, reused, and needs to be stated in the plan, and specifically in which formats or how the existing data, existing outputs are going to be reused. Because in some fields, it's not just a question of making new data. It's sometimes that you reuse already some data that exists. Also, in the data management plan, you need to explain how you're going to process, store, and preserve all these data and outputs, how it's going to be accessible, and who could access and when they could access. Could be you can grant access to your colleagues, but you want to delay the access to other people or other people from other groups, or more in a general way to the public. Also, it's important to state who is the responsible of the data, because if you're going to place some conditions, some restrictions, it's important to know who is going to grant these permissions and who is at the end the responsible of any kind of data where we can address if there is any problem. Of course, you have to refer to any ethical question on your data and how you're going to take that into account. And at the end, how data is going to be reusable in one way or another. You need to answer questions like, do you use personal or sensible data? Is your storing facility safe? Are you using a standard formats? Will your data be understood? Are you authorized to reuse existing data? How are you going to share your data? And how are you going to publish your data? There are some questions that you need to make yourself. And there are many templates for data management plans, but you'll see that at the end, more or less, that all are somehow similar. This was the template from the Horizon 2020, and you'll see the how similar it is with the output management plan, to show you that it's nothing that we have invented like from scratch. It's more like something that we have, we were based on this template from the Commission. The first section is always a kind of a summary. Also, here there is a section on how data can be made fair. Also, there is a section in the template in the Commission about the allocation of resources, a part of security, ethical aspects, and other issues. Also, an important thing to know, and is not important for you for this project, but maybe in the future, if you have other projects or you have other funders, there are tools that help you with this tool of writing and sharing a data management plan. It needs to be clear, these are tools that are available, but are not required. The only thing they have is that they provide some templates and provide collaborative ways of sharing with your colleagues. But at the end, it's just having a document that is shared with some people. And the document is not just a white paper, it has some kind of sections based on different templates. So if anyone wants to have a look of these tools, or they have heard about, you have heard about these names, the digital DMP, Argos, or Data Steward Wizard, you can have a look on that. But what is important here is that we have not a template, we have an infrastructure, we have a tool, a platform where you need to fill your output management plan. And this is the way I look, or I see the platform. Here is how I receive the information of your output management plans. I can access to the platform and look at the different details of your project, and in this case of your plan. And it's again like a kind of template because you have different sections. The first section is the summary. And this is important that when you're gonna fill this output management plan, to read before what are you required to fill in each section. I always advise that at the beginning, you need to think about in general and not just thinking that I have to fill this specific section. It's more like having to read all the explanation of all the output management plan. And then once you have clear answers of questions like the ones I showed before, then you can begin to answer in each of the sections. So in the summary, clearly you are asked to explain which is the output that you will generate or collect, which will be the formats and standards, and if this output is going to be valuable for other researchers, and what some data or output cannot be shared. Why this data cannot be shared? For instance, if you work with sensitive data, if you work with data that could have some privacy issues, etc. Then there is a section on responsibilities. Who will be responsible for monitoring the plan in your team? Who is going to be the one who is following that? Well, what we said in the beginning is what we do, or we need to make some changes because we have something that was not expected. Also, who is the responsible of managing the data? That could be more than one person because could have any group, any groups of people could have different responsibilities. And also who is at the end the responsible for the preservation of the outputs. And as I said, if there is some restrictions on accessing to the data, who will be the one who could grant the access to the data? Also, we need to state the question of the FAIR principles, how data is going to be findable, which metadata will be used, which identifiers will be used, which version control, if needed, is going to be undertaken, the accessibility, who could access the data, when, which methods of software are necessary to access the data, if there is any documentation for the software, etc. In the interoperability, as I said before when we were defining the FAIR principles, it's not so easy because the level of interoperability could be something really challenging, but at least you can explain if you're going to use some standard vocabulary or ontology, or if you're going to follow some standards from your community, etc. Finally, the reusability, as I also stated before, it's the section where you can explain how your data can be reused in a broadly way, so giving access to the public and by means of a license, or if there is any period where you're gonna close the data, and after this period you're gonna open the data to everyone or to a restricted group of people, etc. Finally, there are points here on data security, how if there is, especially if you work with personal data, sensitive data, you need to follow some principles of data security. So here you can state, it's more like a reflection that you must do, and you must think how I'm gonna make preserve this data in a safe way. And also you can here mention all the ethical issues. So just saying that, okay, since we have this ethical issue here, we're gonna process by having a validation of our committee or any board that will provide this validation for the ethical research. And let's have a look now of the different points as of when I'm performing the research, things that, well, I have to take into account these issues when I want to reflect it in my plan. So the ethical consideration, it's important that this is the most important and FAIR is the least important. And this is this image with the 6 points is to show you that when we are dealing with personal data, for instance, the last point will be the FAIR. We don't need to think, oh, I'm working with personal data, but the most important is FAIR. No, in this case, is the least important. What is more important is to design your research assuring that you respect the privacy. You might have to perform an evaluation of the privacy issues if needed. That's something that you, of course, as a researcher, you need to talk with your institution, and as probably as a manager of projects you are already aware of. You need to build a strong informed consent to let the people understand what how they are engaged when they participate in your research. And of course, you need to fulfill all the control and safe criteria to allow the data, in this case, this personal data, to be saved in some place. And at the end, we can discuss if some part of the data, once processed, once pseudonymized, etc., can be made fair, openly, or with some restrictions in the access. This is a way to show it. Also, this is another way this comes from the University of Rotterdam. And again, the important at the beginning is other issues and not to share the data. So that's these two slides is to show you that the policy is not just based on sharing data. It's also important to learn how to keep the data in safe places, and in some cases this is the most important. Of course, when you share data, you can share personal data, but you need to do some kind of anonymization process. Could be also, we call it pseudonymization. So this is an example where a person with all the data that we have, we can transform in an individual that has not a specific data. It's more like a range of data, or some data that make a broad idea or broad concept. This sometimes works, but sometimes it doesn't work. It depends on the sample, because if there is only one person with this age group, or if there is only one person living in a small village with some features that are unique for them, then these processes fail, because the anonymization could be reversed, and the data could be easily de-anonymized and then identify the person. This is a way. There are other ways, for instance, more in qualitative data. You can also, so if you perform surveys or you perform some text with information, it's not just a question of deleting some names. It's also sometimes you need to read all the things, because maybe in the there is information that is already sensitive and has privacy issues, and then you have to perform other process of anonymization. Also, there are other techniques that are more that requires more skills, like this. I don't know if you are aware of the differential privacy, where you have a database and you can add some data, you add additional data, and then if you make the analysis, you get similar answers. So this is a way that you cannot identify that you have a new sample there, and then it's a way somehow to also ensure that the privacy is kept. But these are really technical techniques that if you want to share the data, you have to perform with really with caution, because at the end, what we don't want is to put in risk the privacy or other rights of people when we share data. Also, when we work with data, we need to take into account other advices, like, for instance, if we want to reuse data, sometimes we think that, well, data is available in internet, available somewhere, and we can reuse it. Well, we need to read carefully how we can reuse the data, how we can republish the data once we work with the data. And here I just put a couple of cases that afterwards you can read it more with more detail. One that, well, they grant you access to use the data, but they specify clearly that you cannot reuse beyond your research. You have to delete any backup copy, any modified copy that you have used, you need to be deleted. So that's something that we need to take into account, because sometimes we don't read the terms of use, and maybe we don't fulfill the requirements of the owners of this data. On the other hand, we can find this kind of open data, completely open, where here is more than a license. It's not just a license. Here they say that at the end you can do whatever you want with the data, and you are not really required to, by law, to acknowledge the authorship of the data, but they are more based in community norms. And that's what they state here, that it's community norms or good scientific practices that expect that the proper credit is given. So it's sometimes there is not a question of a copyright, it's more a question of the scientific practice. And also important is to use standard formats when possible, organize your folders, or use meaningful names for your files, use the control version. Just a few examples here. There are lists of formats. It will depend where you publish your data. Sometimes you will get the list of the formats. Organizing data, this is an example from a PhD student in the Netherlands where she was sharing how she was organizing the data with the different folders. I think this is crucial, especially when you work with a team, because if you at the beginning stipulate how you're gonna make these structures, it will be easier for your colleagues if you maybe abroad, or you share your folders with other people, to let them know what is inside your folders, and the same with the names. Also documenting the data, if you do this documentation at the beginning, sometimes with the tools that allows you to gather the data, it will be easier then to build the metadata. And finally, where to store and save your data. And there are multiple options, but some of them are not advisable when you want to keep your data for a long time. Of course, I may use USB device or personal computers temporarily because I'm going to a lab or to a place where I need to bring those tools. But at the end, we need strong and safe places, infrastructures where I can perform backups and I can perform security with my data. So it's something that we need to take into account. If we look at the cycle again, you'll see here, this is an example from the Netherlands where they were placing different points where it's important to decide where I'm gonna store and save my data. And at the end, when we think about sharing our data, because as I said, this is one of the ideas, that to open the data as much as possible, we can have different choices. We have the subject-based repositories, and this should be the first option. If you want to share data and you already have a place where you look for data from other colleagues, from other projects, this is the right place to share the data, because this is where the community is sharing data, or any other outputs. Could be working for materials, could be also working for software, etc. If we don't have this option, because this is not there is not a stable solution for that, we can look at institutional repositories or national repositories. And at the end also, we can look at what we call the multidisciplinary repositories, some of them commercial, like Figshare or Mendeley Data, and some of them quite known because from European projects or other projects are used, like Zenodo. Zenodo is run by the CERN and is supported by the Commission as an option to share not only data, could be shared protocols, could be shared papers, could be shared anything. It's like a neutral repository. Of course, if you have your institutional repository or your national repository, maybe they are more flexible on the conditions of sharing your data. When you go to these multidisciplinary repositories, you have conditions that you may not change for your project. And this is a table with the different features of these multidisciplinary repositories. You can have a look by clicking at the link provided by the Autonomous University. And also at the Catalan level, we have this new option that is like a consortium that for universities and research centers that has established this repository for data. And when you place your data in a repository, you have to think about how I'm going to share the data, with which license, what I'm going to grant. And this is important to choose, because at the end, what we say here is what people will be allowed to do by default. And what we don't grant by default, people could ask you. If you don't grant, for instance, the commercial use of your data, then people could say, well, okay, I want to use it commercially. To whom? I have to ask our address, and then you have to decide in your planification who will be the person or the group of persons who will decide and hypothetically grant the permission, the right to do so. And also another interesting project that was placed in Harvard a few years ago, and there are also discussions of trying to place it in other repositories, was to share the metadata. So instead of sharing openly the data, to share openly the metadata by classifying the data by colors. So if I have data blue or green, it's somehow publicly, and any other color requires more identification, more approval, etc. What we have here, the DUAI, is the data user agreement that you might need to sign when the access to a specific data set has some control. These are the kind of documents that you may be asked to sign when you want access to some data that needs this restriction, and then you need to fulfill all the conditions. If you want more information about all these practices, there are here research data management best practices for health science, and you'll see here there are a lot of resources. So until here, what I say, the more theoretical, more the explanation, how you can do that. And after, now I was planning to share with you some examples, good practices, also bad practices. But before, let me ask you if you have any question. I don't see any hand or any comment in the chat. Okay, so let's then share some examples, real examples from some data management plans. What I want to stress here is how they explain how they do things. Also, what I want to show you is that even you can have a template where you can follow the templates, because you are required sometimes for to fill the different sections. You can also have your own data management plan, to a workable management plan with tables or things like that, as you'll see it in a moment. So let me go back to the presentation. Okay. So a couple of examples of data management plans. This is a real management plan from a project called Conception. And they say already in the introduction that this is a working document that will evolve during the project and will be updated to reflect the progress. They also state that the DMP will be updated in the different evaluation periods. And they say also that the data management plan will follow the FAIR data principles, so that data will be findable, accessible, interpretable, etc. What is important in this data management plan is that they already have like a cycle of what they're going to do with the data. So it's not required to have these things in the data management plan, but they think that it's important to define at any moment, so how all the processes that the data will follow. So this is a good example where you can just have a look, and also if you are interested to follow in your research. They also state that they need to explain for each work package, this is a project with different work package, the data summary. And as you see here, the questions are similar to any other templates, or like the one from the Commission, the one from the La Caixa. it's always this part of the summary: the purpose of the data, which are the types and formats, the origin. These are some in the data management plan. If you afterwards look at the PDF that is available in this link, you'll see that they have made like individual data management plans for any responsible of one of the process of the project to answer. So they ask every responsible of a task to answer individually to this mini data management plan. And also they perform these tables, and in the PDF you have first the questions, and afterwards, as in an annex, they have all the answers for I think there are 4 or 5 word package where they have answer. So which partners will be collecting the data, the data will be stored for each task, and which type of the data they're gonna collect, and the process of cleaning, transforming, and analyzing the data. So this is a way to structure all the data management and to structure for like different packets of the project. This is just an example. And another example, this is a second real data management plan. This is a project called Takedown. They follow the template also from the funder, but they use this kind of table. So first of all, they say, okay, we have 8 different types of data, and they classify them for the origin. Some are data that are publicly available, some are data that they're gonna create, what they call the primary data. And in the same table, they already place the formats. These are the formats that they're gonna use. I'm not going to discuss if it's the most suitable format or not, or if they might have only 2 or not 3 stars, but this is not the point here. The point here is that they already, in the summary, they identify types of data, origin of this type of data, and the different formats. Once they have performed the first part, they go to the second part, and they say how the data is going to be open or not, and they explain for the 8 formats if the data is going to be openly available for everyone. And they justify why this data is not going to be open. And also they look at possible solutions, alternative solutions, if this data could be or not open. So of course, if you have a collection of contacts, because you need to, in this case, they needed to perform a survey, probably these contacts don't need to be open, and they don't really have to be open. So that's the justification they have here. Or some interviews, they don't need to perform and to share some of the full results of those interviews, etc. And once they decided which data is going to be open, here they say which is the level of accessibility, if there will be any tool that will be required to reuse this data, and which will be the metadata or information that will be along with the data. So these are some good practices that you can think about it when you fill your output management plan. But also, I have some bad examples that I just found a few days ago from a university in the US, where they show these as bad examples. So for instance, they say all sample data will be collected and organized using whatever. The files will contain information about sample characteristics and the conditions under which characteristics they were measured. Approximately 1 gigabyte or 2 gigabytes will be generated. Well, these colleagues from this library of, I think it's Nebraska, they were saying, well, this is not a good practice because it's more generic. You don't need to explain in a generic way what you are going to do. You need to be more concrete. Which kind of data, how they're going to be organized, how they're going to be collected, which will be the information that you will provide. So that's a bad practice, just to use it in a vague form. A second example of a bad example is all files will be stored on secure computer, all laboratory notebooks will be stored in PI's office. Yes, but what does it mean, secure computer? Which files are you gonna, all data? So that's what is required here. Again, more concretion. And finally, when they say data will be available to anyone who desires access to our data, when possible, data will be made available online. This is again something that we see in many output management plans. No, you need to state at the beginning. It's not something like it's a desire. It's something that you need to state how someone can access to your data if it's closed. And when it's stated here, when possible, data will be made. What it means when possible, we will decide when possible. All data will be possible, available for everyone. Which data will be possible and which data will not be possible. So you need to discuss before starting your project which data you foresee that you want to be open and which data not, and specify it, not in a generic way. So these 3 examples are to show you that in the data management plan, it's not that you have to fill something in a generic way. It's something that you need to be more concrete. And once we've seen some data management plans from real cases and we've seen some bad examples, let's have a look at some real cases from projects like the ones from your call, from previous call. So sometimes we face these kind of comments. Process data will be publicly available in scientific articles. Open access journals will be preferred option to publish data. Results will be published in international peer review. Okay, here the problem that we've seen it has changed a bit now, but especially at the beginning of the process of reviewing output management plans was that the idea is that if you are fulfilling the FAIR principles, data should be published independently from publications. It's perfect that open access journals will be one of the outputs, but the idea is that data can be linked to the publication by means of DOIs. So the idea is that data should be shared not in publications, but in specific repositories, because then they are findable and they are identifiable. Because if you just publish the data in a publication as a supplemental material, then data is not findable. Your paper is findable, but usually the data is not findable independently. And the idea of the data repositories is to make data more visible and make data visible for the data, not just for the publication. Here, there's an explanation. I think it's a good practice here to explain. So all the different formats that in this case the researchers were using. RNA sequence derivative data will be in PDF FAST formats. For proteomic data will be PDF and Excel formats. Again, you can say, well, maybe this is not the best suitable format, but here is more. I'm not going to discuss now which is the best or worst format. Here is more to discuss that in the data management plan, here there's a concretization of which are the formats I'm going to use, and specifically for this data, which are the formats I'm going to use. Also here, we'll have the explanation on the FAIR principles. The other ones were cases or examples in the first section and the summary. Here, they explain all the data, how during the development will be maintained until the results are patented or published. This is fair enough. I mean, this is something that it makes sense. At the time of disseminating, data will be presented in peer review scientific articles and published in specialist open access institutional repository. Well, here is where we have this or, well, we have to decide if it will be in the repository or not. We can provide already information about which will be the repository. Here, it's good that they already mention the identification by a DOI, and they explain that at least all the data, they say at minimum, all the data requested to be publicly available by the publishing journal will be made publicly available. Okay, that's fair enough. The journal will request sometimes to make your data, but you don't need to forget that also the funder is requiring you to publish your data. So it's not just a decision that the journal will ask you. You have to remember that your policy in this call is that you need to share as much as possible your data. So it's something that you need also to think. And in this case, the researchers should not just say that we're going to share data when the journal asks me. It's something that you need to say, to remember that it's your funder who is actually asking you. Here also the FAIR principles, another example that they say that the document on in this case there is the case that some data will be open, but other data will be closed, and they will, under request, you will be asked. Again, it's you are already linked, it's always linked with the journals, and as you see, this is a trend that it's more this cliche of always publication in journals and forgetting that data could be published also alone and not just with the journal. And also another bad practice here, where they say, okay, we have a European recommendations, open science policy. Once our group feels that all, well, it's more like a, it's you need to concrete more, to specify more, and at a minimum, all the data requested to the publicly available. Again, it's a similar example of not saying really exactly what you are asked. You need to explain which data you're going to share, which data you are not going to share. Okay, so that's some examples of how you can fulfill your output management plan. And as I said at the beginning, feel free to contact me with any questions, and like the ones they already the question that previously was asked, but you have time to fill your output management plan to clarify any question. And sure, that's something that we are committed to do. You will provide you with some feedback. Even your output management plan is fantastic, is perfect, and could be shared as a good example. You will get at least a message of congratulations. We want to provide you with feedback because we think that it's important that you receive any kind of feedback. It's as I said, this is not just something that you need to feel like a bureaucratic or something, a requirement that you need to fulfill. We think that this is important to increase the level of the data that is shared on this way of making this optimal reuse of the research data. So this is the end of today's presentation, but we have some time for any question that you may have now. No questions, no reactions.
I raised my hand.
Hey.
Ignasi. It's not a question, it's a...
It's Paulo Aguiar.
Exactly.
Where are you from, sorry?
Porto, Portugal.
Okay.
Okay, it's not so much a question, it's more a comment. So thank you so much for the presentation. It was very clear and very useful. So thanks so much for it.
Okay, thank you very much.
I don't know how to raise my hand here.
Okay,
I'm
say
trying,
your name,
so,
then...
Ira Milosevic, Coimbra University.
Okay.
So my question is the following. What do we do when, so in my case, sometimes the way how we generate the data do not belong only to one project, but belongs to multiple projects. So let's say, then I have an issue when I publish one project. I can't really make all the data the way how we generated them publicly available because the other project is not published. And then I had additional complication that my collaborator with whom I generated the data does not want this data to be all publicly available. So what do I do in this case? Well,
that's a very interesting question, because it's why the output management plan is for. I mean, to think about, well, I may use this data that already belongs to another project. I'm authorized to reuse it, and if you, in your case, you were saying no, I'm not authorized, or only authorized to reuse just a part of it. So it's not a problem, because, as I said, is you can justify in your output management plan that you would like to open as much data as possible, but there are data that you cannot open because it doesn't belong to you. And especially in these projects where you have different partners, it's important at the beginning that you state future reuses of the data. So in this case, if you are now working with other partners, you may already think about in the future, how we're going to reuse this data individually for other projects. And if you solve this question at the beginning, it will be easier in future projects to reuse it. So if now you have a situation where you are going to reuse some data that you cannot make it public because before the situation was different, then you can say, well, in this case, I'm going to reuse this data. I'm allowed to reuse this data, but only internally, and I cannot publish the data for that reason. If someone wants to access to this data, then contact the original holder of that data. And that's fair enough. I mean, that's something that you can state in the output management plan, and nobody will say anything to you because you cannot break the rights or the situation that was in the past.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Any other question or comment? I don't see everyone and I don't see all the hands. So if anyone just want to open the mic and say hello and make the question, feel free.
Well, Ignasi, this is Paul again. So
okay,
I do have one question that came to my mind now.
Go ahead, Paulo.
So when you were showing us the ways that we have to make our data available in terms of rights, so the different types of if it can be used for commercially, if it can be used, so all these options, you have several options. What is the best practice regarding the commercial use? I'm saying in the sense in the scientific community, we are sharing data. We are sharing for development. Should we always keep it fully open so a company can use this data and make a product out of it, or we should kind of constrain it? So I don't know the right answer, and for that particular one.
I don't know the right answer either, because it depends on your institution, your situation, your project. So you might see that by default, CC0 or CC-BY is one of the options that are somehow promoted or fostered by some funders. But with this license, you have to be aware that anyone can reuse it for any purpose. So there are no restrictions on this license. We can see, we have things to think that they are good to use these ones. And as you say, sometimes you may think, well, then someone can use it commercially without any authorization, and you might prevent that. So in these cases, you must always think which is what your funder established, if there is any requirement from your funder. That sometimes there are not these requirements, but you have to think about that. You have to think about your institution, because in many cases, the data does not belong to you as a researcher. The data belongs to your institution. So you might discuss with your institution about which is the policy in that institution. If we follow this idea of the public money, then if it's public money, then has to be to the public. And when they say to give it back to the public, we cannot make any restriction. Public is public in general. So that's why some of these public funders say that CC-BY or CC0 is the most suitable. But of course, there are, we have to study case by case and study the situation and look at your policies. And of course, you may use one license for a project or for a kind of data and use another license for another kind of data. We also have the case where we have not just a public funder, or we have also maybe some business involved in your research, and then the business firm or will require some other conditions for that. So there is not a single answer for your question. It's more to always say that to think which are the consequences of having one license or the other.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Still have some minutes if someone want to raise the hand or just open the mic.
Hello, it's Paula again. I asked before. I have another question that's very specific related to the licenses as well.
Okay, go ahead,
So
please, Paula.
in principle, I understand that the researchers should state at the output management plan whether they want to assign a specific license already. Is it necessary that is included there? That would be my first question. And if so, how to overcome the idea of the fact that it's researchers who are most of the time designing the licenses that they want for their data, but the fact that it's usually the institution who is the owner of the data. So shouldn't be the owner of the data who's assigning the licenses, and could we, for example, as an institution, decide the license? I don't know if I'm explaining, it's quite specific, but.
Okay, yeah. The first question was if the license should be in the data management plan, you said?
Yes, exactly. That's the most important, actually.
Yes, I think it's important to, when, especially in this section of reusability, how do you expect to share your data? And again, you may say the primary data won't be shared because for any reason, but secondary data, one process, one mix with other data, etc., is going to be shared. You can state that. But when you say that you're going to share your data, then you have to explain how you're going to share and which will be the level of reusability of your data. So this is something that you can you must state in the data management plan. You may say there, for instance, that you're going to use this or the other license because your institution has your policy, or because your funder has required that, or whatever reason you are choosing that license. Of course, it's important that the choice of the license should be somehow decided not by the research themselves, but for the institution, because in many cases, the policy in your institution states that the owner of any copyright that could be derived from the data set, it's from your institution. And it's really crucial when you use licenses with the non-commercial and the non-derivative elements, because then it's the rights holder who can lift those requirements. So it's the holder who says, I will grant you commercial use, or I will grant you the right to make a derivative work, in this case, a new data set coming from the original one. So my advice would be that look at your institution, discuss with the staff people, with the director of your institution, look at your policies, and then inform your researchers about them, in this case, when filling the output management plan and taking any decision on sharing data. On the same way that when you are working with personal data, you need to look for your data officer in your institution and ask how you want to deal with this data, or when you have ethical issues, you go to your ethics committee to get the validation.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Paula. Anyone else? So if there are no more questions, we will finish here. Thank you very much for attending the session. And I hope that you will, the ones who are researchers, that you will fill the output management plan, and the ones who are helping researchers, that you'll get more information about how they have to fill this data management plan. And both, I mean, researchers and project officers or people who is helping in the research process, feel free to contact me for any question you have in the future with this data management plan. And for the researchers, we'll be in touch, and probably we'll have feedback from my colleague or myself regarding your output management plan. So good luck in your research. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Ignasi. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.